started. We're a minute in. So it's Webform Choose Your Own Adventure. Start with my intro. Yeah, Chad, you brought up the Q&A. I'm willing, okay, let's try the Q&A and I can switch over to it. My concern with the Q&A is I think there's an opportunity here. Let's stick to the chat, because look, if someone asks a question in a queue and someone else can help me and knows the answer or can link to a resource, that could help the discussion. And I feel like the Q&A is going to be very isolated and I'll have to answer every question, which won't be possible with, wow, 295 people in the room. So let's stick to the chat. And I'm good at this. I can manage the chat and I look over here and you'll see me be distracted. All right, I'm Jacob Brockowitz, known as Jay Rockowitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect. I built and maintained the Webform module for Drupal 8. So this is kind of like an amalgamation of all my past presentations. And this slide includes links to all the past decks that I've done. And what I did is I pulled information to one giant deck so we could choose our own adventure and go through lots of different topics that are developer specific or business owner specific. And if you're working in government, I definitely recommend checking out the Webforms for Government presentation, the slides. And by the way, with each one of these decks, if you Google the name of the slide, the name of the presentation, you'll find a video on YouTube. And I just love this slide. Jeff, who was on here, saw this presentation many years ago. This is the first presentation I ever did about Webforms when it was called YAML form. I just think it's a funny slide because of the color scheme, and the first presentation I ever did where I actually started getting comfortable doing this. So this is a massive deck with 24 different segments that we're going to go through. And yeah, Jessica, I'll talk about the Gov Summit at the end because I think I can inspire people to attend that and remind me at the end. I'm going to go, there's all these topics. I've put stars next to the topics that I feel I have to go through. And we could jump around if someone asks a question and I have slides that you would help answer the deck. Okay. Yep, you're asking about designing and layout. I can get to that. That's cues always help. That's okay. So I'm going to start. You guys are looking. I'm not going to read through all of these. My goal is to answer your questions. Spam is at the end and we can talk about that. And to let you choose your own adventure in this presentation and get the most out of it. There's a link to the slides in the chat and someone else can repost it. And the first thing we have to do is why use the Webform module. I'm actually making notes of some people's comments. All right, D8. By the way, hold on to your cues until I say you can, because I think it's going to be hard for me. I see how fast this is going. Okay, the Webform module, powerful and flexible form builder and submission manager for Drupal 8 and 9. The use case, I boiled it down to this simple 3 steps. You're building a form, you're collecting data, and you're distributing that data. And this is the only live demo I have set up. Okay, let's go with sticking questions in the Q&A tab. I see the problem and I agree with you. And I'll jump over to it and I'll look at them. Let's move in that direction. Just put them in that tab. It's only a live demo where it's really just a walkthrough of the Webform module to get people started. I do this over and over again. So the way that I start out is I say, hey, here's a contact form. Everyone knows what a contact form is. And my goal is to walk through these steps and look, we're at the form and we want to tweak this form. I want to add a company. So I go over to the builder and here's the form and I can add an element. And here's a text field. I'm going to call it company. I'm not going to change any of the settings. I'm just adding it to the bottom of the form. I'm going to switch over to the view tab. And you guys can see that there's a company element at the bottom. There's a slight mistake here where it should be at the top below your name and be required. So what I'm going to do is switch over to the build tab. And you can do the same thing. You could drag it up, check required, hit save, edit it. But it's a good opportunity to show a very advanced feature to the Webform module, which is editing the source. And it's one of my favorite features. And this is YAML, and it's showing you the render array behind the form. We can talk more about this, but what I'm doing is editing the form, and I'm changing your company, changing the label, and I'm making it required, and I'm hitting save. This is very powerful because you can add every single label on your form at once. Now I'm going to jump to the test tab. So instead of viewing it, I'm going to go to the test tab, which will fill out the form for you with reasonable defaults. Now I'm going to hit send, and we have switched. We've built a form. We're collecting a submission. We've collected a single submission here, and now we're in that collect mode. And we have that submission come in. We're going to go over to the results tab, and we can see the single submission. We can click through on it. We're going to go into this in a little more detail. You can view it. I did take out, you can download PDFs. This feature exists. It's just very cool where you can convert this submission to a PDF. It's very useful for archiving. The PDF that you're seeing can be customized in any way, shape, or form. You can attach it to an email. I don't need to go much more into that feature. So now we've reviewed these results. And keep in mind the distribute nature of the Webform module. When I click submit, it did send an email. That's distributing the email. Basically it's a way of distribute. You send an email. Another thing you might want to do is pull down all your submissions into CSV, and that's in the download tab. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to do it as an HTML table, which could be open in Excel. You can customize this table that's going to open in Excel, but in this case, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and just show it on screen. It's really just showing you that, yes, you get this nice table, and this is a plugin that you could customize this table to your heart's content. I mean, we just walked through the end-to-end usage of the Webform module. I'm going to go back up. I can't believe there's this many questions. So I'm going to go pause here, look at some questions and see if I can answer them and maybe say yes. Okay, I'm going to run. Oh, there's not that many questions, and this helps. Are the PDFs accessible? Do they have the tags in place? They're the HTML. We're using a WK-HTML generator. There's lots of ones. It's the entity print module. So I don't know the accessibility, but basically the concept is you take HTML and you put it into the PDF. And I think generators do some conversion of HTML's accessibility. Are there payment donation options? We'll get to add-ons. There's a list of add-ons, and we could talk about that. I'll make a note toward the end about payments. I think that's fine. Storing submissions, alternative mechanisms. Yes, I will definitely spend time on that. ISO standards in Webforms. I'm going to have to hold off on that until the end because I don't know exactly what you mean, which is fine. Oh, the spam, we have dedicated, I'm making a note about spam. Okay, so I'm seeing Chris's question, is there a limit, by the way, I have to read these out loud, limit of the number of Webforms an install can have? There is a limit we have to work around for performance. Is Webforms are config entities, a little technical, and if you have 1,000 Webforms, you start hitting a slight bottleneck, and we need to kind of sort that out and have that sponsored and work out that detail. I'm going to keep going, and I'm reading some questions, and I will answer them as I go through. So I'm going to skip one. Why did I build a Webform module? Because I don't think that's as important as going to what are some features included in the Webform module, because I think people are asking that type of question. So we've seen, this is a good list, and I think it answers some questions because people are curious. Like there's a drag and drop form builder. You can have multi-column layouts, so you can have elements or inputs side by side. You can also have forms open in modal dialogues, and even the confirmation message open in modal dialogues. Conditional logic is supported. Opening and closing, scheduling submissions, pre-population, email handling is what we've talked about. Remote post is this idea of taking data and putting to a third party. Options are really heavily supported. That means like select menus or even building your own image select elements. And you'll see a demo of that. On the right-hand side, it's kind of more about submission. And I think people do ask this question. I saw the limit of Webforms. You can limit the number of submissions. And people can preview, you can autofill, draft. You can have purging, access controls we can spend some time on. I'm really proud of the confirmation message handling because there's all these different aspects. You can even share your forms with third parties. There's someone asking a question about the differences from D7. The quick explanation is a completely new code base in Drupal 8 and 9. And there is a Webform migrate module that does move your forms and submissions over. There is feature parity with Webforms from Drupal 7. How Webforms are used on your site is different, and we can get into that. That's probably the biggest, like building a form is kind of the same experience and the same features, but then when you start using them on your site, it's a slightly different user experience. And I'll come back to it. With elements, there's just a massive amount of elements. It's like 80 plus elements, from the standard ones you'd expect to advanced HTML, file uploads. There's even a signature element. I'm going to do a little demo of those in a second. But then when you get into your elements, and I kind of glossed over it when I did the demo, is there's just a ton of features and settings for each individual element. Now, you can enhance select menus. You also have dedicated computed elements, but each, you can have tooltips, slide outs, input masks, character counters. There's all these different ways to tweak the behavior of your form. But it's really, this is a very important slide for anyone who feels overwhelmed when they look at the Webform module. It ships with reasonable defaults. You don't have to customize everything, but you can. You saw in the demo, I created an element and just hit saved. There's nothing to worry about there. There are a lot of configuration settings, and this is just walking through that simple one of the confirmation message and showing that there's 7 different ways to display it as a page, a message, a modal dialog. And that's where I'm just going to show you here is you can click and hit save, go to the test tab, and you'll get a little modal dialog, and then someone can dismiss it. Okay, I'm going to keep going, kind of looking at the chats going on. So there's this style guide. So there's an examples module. The Webform example module just ships with some examples of all the elements that are available. This is like the kitchen sink. This is even useful for your designers to see what the forms are going to look like when they're in a dedicated theme. And it's just showing you got little image select, cute kittens, signatures, likerts. There's a terms of service element just to kind of improve the UX. All entity references are supported. And this is showing composites. I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time on composites, but it's a group of elements working together. And then at the bottom, you get into styles. Here's all the messages that are available. Okay, so we're on some features. We're going to take some of the questions, and we're going to go, okay. Oh, this is, wow, the Q&A is great because it's archiving them. So, oh, wow. Someone's asking, is there a scenario where a contact form would be better than a web form or vice versa? I actually have, what are some alternatives? I am going to jump around because this is choose your own adventure. I'm going to answer that question here. So this is a slide from one of my first presentations where I felt like I needed to say Webforms is not the end-all be-all solution. There are proprietary form builders and you can embed those on your site. There's open source ones. I'm going to give a shout out for the middle one of Form.io, which is a great solution where it's open source, it's rich JSON powered forms, and you can embed them on your site, and they actually have some Drupal support. For core, there is a contact module for building simple contact forms that integrate better in core, but you can't build massive forms with that system, and you can't have a lot of them. So I always recommend starting out with the contact form module that starts in core to see if it meets your project's requirements, and then switch to Webforms. Going to some other questions. By the way, this is the whole point of choose your own adventure because I can just jump around. So people are really bothering me about spam. This is hilarious. This is where I'm going to just play with this deck, and that's why I did this, because I can jump to spam and just end this discussion. All right, spam. These are 3 key spam modules I recommend: Honeypot, Antibot, and Captcha. Honeypot adds a hidden field, Antibot puts a little JavaScript, and Captcha we all know is annoying as hell, but it works. Yep, that's what I'm saying here. Honeypot can be really good enough. Here's the thing that people are missing about spam protection is it can disable page caching. Captcha's really guilty of doing this. It will shut it down, and that could be a huge performance hit. There is a recipe that doesn't do that. It's Honeypot and Antibot, and the idea is to have the hidden field and the JavaScript, and that usually stops robots, but doesn't kill the page cache. It depends on how you want to handle it. You could think about, experimenting with other mechanisms. Other questions. Okay. Oh, okay. Is there an element to match the structure and style across the site? Shared with a JSS library. Oh, this is someone's got me on, like, how do you get a form to kind of work? use a shared component library. I don't have a good answer for that. I am going to talk about composites. That's a question that someone's asking. Okay, computed elements. Let's get in that direction. So I'm going to jump back. Someone asked about computed elements. There are some good examples. And you can learn from the examples. So the Webform examples module shows examples of all the elements which we looked at, examples of computed elements and how to use them. And then there's also just, a multi-step form. We know it's there, but let's see one working. And even multi-column layout, some conditional logic. And then there's the Webform templates, which just gives you really working real-world examples. And, finding and choosing element, I showed you that style guide, but there's also a preview when you're adding it. And this is a good way to just see all the different possibilities when you're building your forms. And this is an example of a computed element of just adding two numbers together. I think this answers that question. So it's using Twig on the back end. It hits the server with Ajax and adds two numbers together. And this is showing you, here's the numbers, you go to the computed Twig element, and you see the little Twig snippet that adds two numbers together. There's also support for computed tokens, which is the idea that you might want to have someone select an entity reference, like a user, and then pull some extra user data into your web form and submission, and it uses tokens for that. I am going to give a caveat on this. This can be very performance intensive computations, and I definitely recommend not doing too many of these and tracking them, and not cascading computed elements. That can cause problems. The alternative is to write a little JavaScript and custom code. And this is just an example of a multi-step form, breaking it down into individual steps. This example does use Ajax and shows that that's supported. It also, what it will do is this demo I'm showing you when it hits preview shows you that you have these settings that you can say, well, I'd like to let people edit the information and they can jump back and forth. All of these are configuration settings. Wizards have a lot of configuration options. Okay, we're on examples. Let's see. Encryption, I'm going to go back to. That's security. Okay, someone asked this question. I like this question. Have you come across a scenario using context module with Webform, hiding and pre-filling form fields based on context like the current page? Heck yes, happens all the time. There are so many features around tweaking a web form based on a gazillion things, like, the fact that you could pre-populate a form. Well, one, we're tracking the source entity of a form, where it's being submitted from, and you can change a form based on that. So someone's on a certain node and they're filling out a form, you can fill out different information. You can set different information. I actually think there's an opportunity to go there. Let's see what other questions. Styling. That's a great question. Wow, so many questions because there's 400 people. Okay. We could go down every question here. Okay. I am going to skip the technical deep dive, and I think that's a good way to go, where we're not going to go into how Form API works in a form. You can look at those slides. You can ask me some questions at the end. But I think this question about context comes down to how to publish a web form on a site. So you can publish a web form as a node block or even in custom code. And when we're talking about node, there's a web form node module. And basically, you build your web form, think of it like a view, and you place it on your site. So you build your web form, and then you place it on a node. And when using the web form node module, it will capture results specific to that node. The best way to describe web form nodes is if you were building an event registration system. An event would be a node. And let's say you wanted people to register, you'd create one single registration form that you would attach to all those events, and it actually tracks that information for each event. That's called the source entity, and we could go into that a little bit more. Blocks, we all know, just place a block on your site. Wherever you place the block, it will track also the source entity URL where it's being submitted from. There's lots of use cases for that. I just want to emphasize in custom code, you can actually just say, I want to put a form here, and it will just render it. It's like pound type equals web form, and that's an element. Blocks just make it easier to include web forms anywhere, panels, layouts, any page on your site. And yeah, to place a block is as simple as go in and say, I'd like to place a block, and there's a web form starter block. And I think I'm even going to just let it be like, here, boom, you select your form. You can select your default values. By the way, the default values allow you to add more context because you can say what's the settings, like what do you want it to default to? Nodes, we went into this a little bit. There's also a references tab. So when you build that event registration system, you have your registration form. You can get this references tab that shows you every single event this form is used on. So it's pretty easy to manage these massive, where you have many instances of a single form on your site. I'm going to skip ahead from this because this really walks through that system of basically creating a dedicated instance of a contact form where, you see it's clicking to the reference tab and adding a web form. And you're basically saying my dedicated instance of this contact form. It just shows you kind of the user experience behind it. Okay, let's go back through some questions. Okay. Secure information I'm going to get to. I love this question. Can web form submissions be converted into content like node content, which is made public on the site? What about views integration? You've just asked like the big questions that are worth answering. What I can do to answer that is start in how to extend the web form module. So both the answers to your questions on, can you generate content and views comes down to add-ons. So add-ons are Drupal modules and projects that extend and provide additional functionality to the web form module and Drupal's form API. And when you install the module, you get a tab which lists out all these add-ons, and there's almost 200 of them. And I would like to do, so this is showing you spam, and I'm going to jump and go to that tab because I think I can answer your question by saying you go to the add-ons tab and you kind of look around. So for views, if I search for views, there's a web form views module that provides views integration. There's also the web form views token field, which I also like. It's just a quick, simple way to get submission data into a view. That's one way. So you can generate a view for your web forms. Also, there's a dedicated video to show how to put those views onto your site. But what I really like to promote is this content. I don't even know the maintainer of this. It's called the content web form content creator module. What this is a handler that generates nodes on your site. This is awesome. It creates a node, hence totally available to views. And also sometimes we just want nodes. We want web forms that kind of front end that user experience to create a node. And this is a really popular, powerful module. And frankly, it's well maintained. I strongly recommend checking it out. Along the way, you also might find code snippets. So, someone brought up like user, you could also create users. There's code snippets to do that. You create a web form handler, and I can get into that in a little bit. I'm going to go back here. Okay. I'm going to finish on add-ons to say, listen, this is the breakdown, spam protection, integrations. Someone brought up payment. This is the way to answer payment. There's an integration with most payment systems. And I think this question was about authorized.net. If there's not an authorized.net add-on, you could use the commerce. There is a commerce integration module, web form commerce integration. So you could use the commerce ecosystem to get that support. Or you could look at other payment modules. I'm pretty sure there's a PayPal one, and you can copy the code. And basically, it's kind of like syncing up the APIs. It's where someone submits a form, you have this handler. It's a plugin, a snippet of code, and you make the payment and then bring the person back to the form. Okay, I'm going to keep going down. Accessibility. Oh boy, I'm making a note there, and I'm going to come back to that question. Oh, someone asked a really good feature question. Ken asks, is there a way to make radios and checkboxes customized for an answer to a previous question? The answer is no. I had never thought of that, and someone brought that up, and it kind of blew my mind. I saw it in another system, and I'm not really sure how I would implement it. Frankly, it does bring up ready. This is not the best answer to a question like that, but it lets me jump to a segment about adding custom CSS and JavaScript to a form. So if I go over to here, I want to make sure I'm in the right segment. Yes, I am. Okay. This is going to address a couple of questions about design and tweaking the web form's look and feel. So how do you change the look and feel of a web form? Well, everything that's displayed on screen, I go out of my way. This is like a core thing. If you're rendering something, you can add custom classes, you can add even custom styles, and you can add custom attributes. And classes, I think people are familiar with. Styles would be adding a little padding. Attributes I use for tracking codes usually. And yeah, this screenshot is showing you an element where you can go in and change the wrapper. Think of it as the whole container around an element. And you can go and add classes and styles to the actual element. And then you can add attributes. There's even the ability to change the label associated with a text field, so that your name, you could change the look and feel of that. This is starting to answer we don't have the ability to do, conditional logic on radios and checkboxes on the options, but there is some ways to do it, frankly. But anyway, we'll start here. You can add custom CSS and JavaScript. I think people understand just a little snippet of CSS. With JavaScript, you can add custom client-side conditional logic. So you could do that based on a question using a little jQuery. This is a good example. It's just showing you the UI. It's a tab. I'm adding basically a border around each element and an alert to the form. And you can do a lot more from there. Moving down, Kaleem asked about Zapier integration. This is totally supported. There's a dedicated video, and I'm going to just show you this because sorry about that. I lost you for a second. I'm going to go back over. I see what my problem is. I'm going to go over here and show you there's a help section, which is videos. And I don't know if Zapier is going to come up. Let me see. It does. Using Webforms to send a submission to Zapier, done by WebWash. And that helps explain. It's pretty easy because there's a remote post handler that allows you to push data to a third party. And I can demo that. I'm going to walk through some of the other questions and see if I want to go there. I like this. Okay, so PDFs, we'll talk a little more about it. PDF generation is available via Drush in the sense of you can export your submissions via Drush, and you can convert your submissions to PDF. You'll get a zip. It'll write a zip out to a file. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Oh, good. I can now look at my little list here, and we're at 2. So we have till 3 o'clock. We have 20 minutes left. I can answer some more questions and do some better demos. I'm going to go to securing a web form. Well, actually, I'm going to jump back to sharing a submission because I like just showing this feature. It makes me happy. You can share your web forms. So there's this web form share module, and all it does is add a tab. You have to enable this and say, I'd like to let a third party look at my web form. But basically, in that tab, you can get a little JavaScript snippet that you can embed on any third-party website, and they will embed the form. This is a little iframe. That gray box is your form in an iframe that could be outside of Drupal. Now, I'm going to keep going to talk about securing a web form submission. I think this is really, really important. You can encrypt the data being written into Drupal. That is one way to secure your data. The other way is to not store the data in Drupal. Disable the saving of results. And you can send it via email or use a web form handler to push it somewhere else. Remote post it to a CRM, for example. Just a screenshot of the web form encrypt module, which is listed in the add-on section. And I'm just showing this feature. It's just important. Everyone knows that this exists. There's a little checkbox. You disable it, and data is not going into Drupal ever. That's it. If you upload files, they're going to get written to the server, but then they get deleted because they're marked as temporary. Now, I'm going to go to this distributing one to continue this discussion and really talk about handlers, because I've mentioned this term, and this is an essential concept. A handler handles data coming into a web form, a submission. And the use cases are email, which we talked about, pushing data to a CRM, remote posting. But there's also subscribe to a mailing list. So there's a MailChimp module. handler. So that module provides a handler that subscribes someone to a MailChimp list. And you can also do stuff like flag a submission based on submission values, like conditional logic. You can even change the confirmation message. And this is showing you the 4 kind of types of handlers that are coming shipped with the Webform module. Email we've talked about. Remote post I'm in a demo. But actions and settings are worth just discussing here and saying an action would be someone enters a certain value and you want to flag a submission. So actions act on a web form submission. And most actions and settings usually work best with conditional logic, honestly. So someone enters, if it's healthcare, I don't feel well. You could put an action that flags a submission. Now settings act on a web form. So you could change a web form's behavior. So the example of settings would be, go back to the situation where someone says, I don't feel well. Well, you probably want to change the confirmation message. I'm just thinking like someone's filling out an appointment request form or whatever notification. And you can use a settings handler to change the confirmation message or the URL to be more specific to the user because you know a little bit about them. So you conditionally change the message to say, we will reach out to you in just a few hours. And the last one's the debug. It just shows you the information coming through. I recommend just using it when you're getting familiar with handlers, especially if you're doing your own custom. And this one's going to walk through a nice feature with emails. I think it's just a powerful one where it, besides picking where you're going to send an email, you can actually route the email to different email addresses based on a selection in a drop-down menu or radio buttons. This is just showing you the twig template where you can actually set twig templates to build an email. But look, it's just going to pull down the 2 and select the type of feedback someone's selecting. Well, is it a comment? Send it to comments@example.com. If it's a bug, send it to bugs@example. This is a very nice, simple UI for that. This is a really important one for anyone doing enterprise stuff. This is showing you how to add a remote post handler. So what I'm going to do is, in here, say I would like when someone fills out this form to post it to mycrm.com. And you can pick the data. By default, it's just the data a user enters and no metadata. The most important thing in this is that checkbox at the bottom, enable debugging, because it shows you what's going to happen. So when I go to the test tab and hit submit, this is going to fail because my CRM doesn't exist and is not really happy that I keep posting data to them. But it shows you the error, shows you the data packet going out. And this is exactly how you'd integrate with Zapier. Zapier has endpoints that are so simple that you just push data to. I mean, it's a really powerful approach to web forms. I've also seen organizations make a policy of store no data in Drupal ever and always remote post it to their CRM. And it is a really good approach. Okay, I'm going to go back to questions. Okay. Wow, are there any more questions? Latest. Oh, people are voting on them. Sorry, guys, that I wasn't familiar with this. Okay, I'm going to do with the voting system. Let's go down there. Okay, I've answered security. Oh, privacy and GDPR. Okay. So you've gotten the idea that you don't have to store data in the database, but to address GDPR, which is a standard that users, and boy, I hate the captioning, got that wrong. GDPR is a standard where users need to be able to control their data. And I think this is a good moment to talk about access controls because it starts to address those requirements. Let me find the section. How do you limit access to a web form? So we've got like 4 levels, and there's some more, but you can set permissions. I think people in the Drupal community are used to that. You can set form level access controls, element access controls, and there's a web form access module. And here there's permissions, and you can say who can edit what. And I want to emphasize, you can say anonymous, not anonymous, but if someone logs in, that's kind of tied to GDPR, is if they're giving you data, you need to let them edit the data. By the way, this is showing you key permissions you want to pay attention to. Don't let everyone edit the source mode. It's not on by default. You got to turn it on. But you can give people permission to access their submissions and permission to delete them. And if you do that and they go to their user tab, I'm going to actually show that because it's a hard thing to kind of emphasize. I've been filling out this form and I go to my profile. users get to view all their submissions, and they can go in and delete them. And that kind of addresses a GDPR requirement. You can also delete it for that. It's the idea of letting users own their information. This is if you're storing it in the database. So jumping back to access controls, it's really important people just wear it. You have full control. You can decide by role, user, permission, who has access to what. On the form level, onto who can purge, view their own, view all, administer. Element levels, I haven't seen anyone ask about workflows, but I think it's important. This starts to get into creating custom workflows in the Webform module. So you can create a form where only certain elements are accessible to administrators. After someone filled out a form, you could create a review process, and you could give someone a rating. You could do a little drop down to say this is approved or not approved. That opens up a lot of possibilities. This is admin notes. I'm just adding an admin note that's only available to admins, not when you view the form, only when you go and edit it. Other questions? The best way to migrate is the Webform migrate module, or you recreate your web forms. People don't know this, but I think it's kind of a good one. You can recreate your web forms, which is totally a legitimate use case. And there's actually a Webform input module which lets you do CSV imports. For small sites, this is a really good, simple workflow where you don't have a lot of money to build a migration for web forms, and you can actually do the opposite of downloading and import a CSV. So you can basically take the, and by the way, what's powerful here is this is just not applicable for migrating. This is coming from other systems. This is a really quick way to get data from anywhere into your web forms. I'm going to keep going. Customizing email templates, there's a ton of documentation. You have the ability to tweak the twig inside. If you turn on twig debugging, you're going to see all the email templates available. Is there a way to purge submissions using a checkbox method? Selecting which submission to delete or not all forms? No, Linda's asking that question. When you go into the admin UI, you can't, here, I'm going to generate 50 submissions. So this is the ability to use the develop generate module to really fill this form. You can't pick and choose checkboxes here. We just haven't done that. You can do that in views, but really it's a purge all or purge in one by one. Granted, you can do it here. It's a fair feature to ask for. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go to latest to be fair to anyone who's posting a question that's not going to get voted up. 2 minutes ago, do users have to delete one by one? Is there a plan to add revisions into Webform? No, that there are add-ons. So someone did do a revision add-on. So there's two kind of things happening. There's a Webform submission log module that ships with the Webform, so it'll track all the changes that are happening to a submission. One of the challenges with revisions is what happens if someone starts changing a web form, and then how do you update the submission? It could become really hard to keep track of. So what the submission log does, it will keep track of the state, tell you who updated the submission. You can even see what values they updated, but you can't really restore it. It's kind of a middle ground. There's also a module to help with that, and I think you'd have to look in the add-ons. Someone's asking about translations. So you can definitely translate web forms. It ships out of the box. You can translate the form using, its config entities, but there's a UI. You don't have to create new forms. It actually translates all the labels. There's been a ton of work, especially in the 6.x branch, which has some major improvements to just the user experience around translating web forms. I just recommend trying it out. There's some videos dedicated to it. Going to other latest ones, accessibility. The Webform module, I'm going to say it, is one of the most accessible form builders on the market, partially because Drupal is accessible. And also, it's important to note that the UI in Drupal is accessible. That's a big change from a lot of systems, especially form builders. Some form builders will output forms that are accessible, but when you get in the UI and try to build a form, it's not. And the Webform module, you can navigate with a keyboard. It has good labeling. I try to do my best to do monitoring. If someone comes up with an issue, I look forward to fixing it. Lots of governments and in Canada, they have very strict accessibility requirements. Yeah, Canada's a great example where they have strict accessibility requirements and translation requirements. So they have tested things a lot and contributed a lot to it. That's the best answer I could give there. The scalability of web forms. With submissions, you can have millions of submissions. I have not seen an issue there. I have seen some, I just gotta say it, some forms that were poorly built that create bottlenecks. There is a bottleneck with if you have thousands of people filling out a form, there's some serials that, like there's the unique ID has some bottlenecks that there's some workarounds for where you can turn off the automatic generation of the basically per web form incremental ID and use the global incremental ID. I think when you're getting it, if you say you want to have 80 million submissions, I think it's good. This is a great opportunity. I'm kind of near the end to plug my presentation at the Gov Summit. I'm going to be talking about project planning for web forms and thinking these things out. And you need to get your requirements up front. If you're doing a site with 80 million submissions, then you need to think it out and plan it. And the example be, if you're going to have 80 million submissions and 500 inputs, you're going to run into a problem. If you have 200, you just need to make sure you design it right. I have seen sites where they've overdone conditional logic, and that creates a bottleneck. And it was unnecessary. I want to emphasize that. Sometimes it's just a plan. It's like being like, well, how do I do this as optimal as possible? And I'm going to talk about that a lot at the Gov Summit. And it's going to be a totally different deck. Okay. Oh, someone's asked about moving web forms from environment to environment. Web forms are configuration entities. That's the system you want to get familiar with. And basically, you can do lots of different tricks with that. That's a powerful thing in the web form, not web form, but Drupal's configuration system. So there's an export tab. And this allows you, and there's some notes about this that you can, this is the web form as configuration that you could download and literally copy onto another site. This is just one workflow to address that requirement. You got to get familiar. I have a dedicated blog post about managing web form configuration and go into it more. I find this incredible. By the way, if you have an issue, this is an awesome way. You duplicate the issue, you download this, and then you can put it in the web form issue queue. My God, we've got a huge number of questions. Okay. SharePoint integration, it has to be a dedicated module. I don't know. Pros and cons of web forms versus content type. It's a hard one to address, but it's just a performance thing. Content types get better integration with Drupal core, but you can't have hundreds of individual content types, but you can have hundreds of web forms with hundreds of fields. And it's kind of the decision between the two that you have to think about. Like if you're building a very rich application and you only have 2 or 3 forms, I would lean toward using content types or the contact module on core. But if I have hundreds of forms, the web form tends to address it. Address validation with Google Maps. There's a web form location module that does have Google Map integration. It's kind of deprecated because the library is no longer maintained. There is support for Algolia to do location validation, which is very nice. Let's see what other. All right, now I'm going to switch gears and vote. Well, if I go back to the latest, we're at the 5-minute mark. I'm going to switch the chat for a second because I got 5 minutes left. Okay. I'm pausing for a second to breathe. I can stay on after. This stays open. So I'm going to basically take questions in 5 minutes and try to wrap up a little bit because there might be something I missed because I'm just talking nonstop. We can look at this. We've gone through a lot, not all, which is totally fine. Let's see. I like that I put stars in because we covered most of the star things that stars are important things that need to go through. I'm going to work on wrapping up. I'm going to talk about getting help. So, because I'm not going to answer all your questions here. So how do you get help with the web form module? Well, there's a documentation, there's a cookbook, there's screencasts in the UI on Drupal.org. Drupal Answers is the best place. Every single question that someone's asked should go to Drupal Answers and actually not the Webform issue queue. Because first you wanted to see if this is supported or someone has some knowledge about it. And if you find bugs or you really need a feature that makes sense, you can go to the issue queue. And I mean, some people are following my blog. You know, you got to go to my blog to kind of understand what to Drupal or not to Drupal means. But, you know, my organization's moving away from Drupal. I still want to maintain the Webform module. So I'm trying to figure out how to make my effort more sustainable. I used to have a couple of slides about that, and I've kind of optimized it because I updated the project page recently to kind of encourage people, one, always to encourage people to get involved. There is an open collective where you can help fund development. At this point, I'm going to start using these open collective funds to deal with the issue queue and to go and fix bugs. And finally, I'm making very clear that if someone's doing, by the way, I think this is why I'm doing the Gov Summit presentation. If you're doing a big web form project, hire me for support because I can help you before you start having problems and avoid them. I can tell you, I know it's worth the money. I've been on projects that have had major problems on a call with 7 to 8 developers trying to figure out the problem that if I was there from the beginning, I would have said, don't do it that way. I would have prevented that from happening. So it's definitely worth, you know, bringing in the expert or the SME. And you can learn more about me at jrockwitz.com. I'm going to stay on. Wow, the number is huge. We're at like 400. I'll stay on as long as there's people in the chat and there's questions being asked. Thank you, everyone, for the comments, attending. I mean, this is the largest turnout I've ever had. God bless virtual for that. Let me take a sip of water. Yeah, and Bill, thank you so much for posting the survey and the slides over and over again. So as people kind of sign off, the numbers are going down. I'm going to go to the Q&A. I am going to sort them by the latest so that I can, you know, really, that means someone's here and they're asking a question and want me. So you could please repost your question if I did not answer it. Can you create a blocker component of form fields, for example, name, address? Yes, that is a great question. Lee's asking about composite elements. It always goes down a rabbit hole, so I don't go there that much, but I'm going to go there here in the UI and demo. But I'm surprised I did not do a lot of demos. So let's add a composite element to this and talk about that. So composite elements, and I did have that in the deck, but are multiple inputs working together. So I can click Add Element, and these are some out of the box. So if I do address, there's two composites. There's a basic address and advanced. Advanced address is the address module. Basic is the one I want to work on. This is, by the way, out of the box, a bunch of, you can collect an address. So let's just look at this address. You have address 1, 2. You can tweak little settings about it. I'm not going to go too far. I'm just going to show it to you. By the way, you can say you want to collect multiple addresses. I won't do that right now, but I'm going to hit save and show you the output. So this is a composite element. You're collecting an address. Now, I can also go in, and you can even collect multiple addresses, but what's more powerful, the demo, to answer that question about composites, is if I do a search for composite, you can create a custom composite. This is like your own version to collect multiple values. So if I say custom composites, let's just do, let's say you're going to get an event registration system. First name, oh wait, this is the key. First name, first name, text field. I'm going to add one. Sorry that I scrolled. Last name. By the way, see? That's nice client-side validation kicking in. There we go. Text field. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go here. And you get this awesome custom composite that you can collect multiple values with. This is incredibly flexible element. So every single widget or piece you're seeing here, you can tweak this. And you can say, I want plus and minuses here. I don't want them. I want 10 default items. You can do that. You can make this sortable or not sortable. Incredibly powerful feature. You can also write these in code. I didn't go into code, but I do make a note that if you're building a large site, writing a custom composite in code is really good because it's stable. Dana's asking how to make contact with me. My website, there's a contact us form there. If you want to hire me, that's the best place. If you don't want to hire me, use the web form issue queue, post your questions there. I try to, get to them as much as I can. That's why I like Drupal Answers, because other people can help with it. Wow, we're still at 300. I know people are eating right now too, but let's see. Any other? Yeah, you're going to have to repost your questions, or I'm going to start wrapping this up. We're only 2 minutes over, which is not a big thing. Reading through branching logic. Well, that's conditional logic. If someone's talking about branching, you do conditional logic. And multi-step forms support conditional logic on each step, so you can branch from there. I didn't talk a lot about multi-steps, which it's evolved a lot in the last few years, because there's a new system called cards, which okay. Let's see. I'm not going to do cards because Adam asked a question, is there a way to post web form submission to a block or page? You can do stuff with views. Like if you want to show results, you can do views and embed them on different pages. There are a lot of web form blocks that you can kind of play with. They'll show count. Oh, there's blocks to show counters that help a lot. Like if you want to build an event registration system and you want to count the number of available slots, there's a lot, and that's a submission limit. So there's lots there. How to pre-populate a visitor if a visitor is known to a market. Oh yeah, CRM. Ooh. Well, that's where handlers kick in nicely. Is handlers allow you to tweak any aspect of a web form. So this is like if you want to do a good CRM integration, you have a developer create a handler, and then you decide how you want that to work. And it could definitely pre-populate the values based on the user account. That's really how people are doing it. If you want a really tight integration, I generally lean toward writing your own custom handler. Can you create a web form on the fly? Looks like one form to the user, but depending on the value set in the database, it includes or doesn't include certain parts. Okay, so conditional logic does get you there. There's also a system called variants that allows you to personalize a web form. There's a dedicated video to it, and I don't know if I have a great example. Let me see if I have a variant example. So variants I do. Oh, let's see if we have a good example here. I'm gonna look. I mean, basically what variants do allow you to make subtle tweaks to the form based on the audience type. So you could say, I use it in healthcare. If a person's a patient, I show them one type of form. If they're a caregiver, I show them. It's the same form, but I'm changing this is important. Conditional logic allows you to hide and show things. That is not personalization. That's hide and showing. What you really want to get into is you want to change the labels of a form. If a patient's filling out a form, you might say, enter your contact information. If the caregiver's filling out a form, you want to say, enter the patient's contact information. I actually tend not to demo it because it's such a complex thing. There is a dedicated video about this. Oh yeah, see the variants. I'm just going to show you the UI and the idea. What I have built forms with massive amounts of variations. So basically, the form has a text field, but you could test. By the way, what's cool about variants is you can do A/B testing. You could test little pieces of functionality. So I can go in here and say, I would like to test a variant. I would like a long form for an organization called A, and it will generate a test. And you can also display these on your site. And the idea is, here's the form type. It's a long form. I'm just showing data in the back end. But now I'm saying hello to organization A, and I'm giving them a text field. A really powerful feature. Okay. Anonymous, do you suggest or are you included in a resource to learn about web forms step by step from a novice to expert? That's a great question. This is something I have to start working out. Frankly, if an organization asked me to do training, I would do it in a heartbeat. I think it would be if an organization's going head first into Drupal and they're going DXP and Acquia and they're going to use web forms as part of their project, they should probably bring me in and have me help them walk through it. There's videos throughout the web form module to help you go from novice to an expert. And I just want to say, like, the example is, I'm just showing this, and there was a slide of this. There's just videos walking through each step. I don't have a step-by-step from novice to expert. Keep in mind, I tried to make this as novice as possible while advanced as possible. So most people can start building forms from day one. Okay. Let's see. Wow, there's still 250 people here. Is there a way to add a field which allows unlimited file attachments to a D7 web form submission? Can't answer that because I don't know D7. Sorry. Will web forms have views blocks operations to resubmit n number of previous submissions? I don't totally understand that. I'm sorry. Can I access fields inside a composite individually for handlers? Yes and no. Sometimes it depends on the use case. I mean, if you build your own custom handlers, absolutely. For rendering, those are individual values. Like the example would be, here's the challenge I have. I'm trying to generate a spreadsheet. There's a question about composites. I have a composite element. It's very hard to represent something that's a composite, multiple values that are unlimited in a spreadsheet. And what happens in that scenario is we're dumping YAML into the column, and that is parsable, but it's not the ideal situation. In that case, you might need to look at the data as XML. Is there a way to update the contact element to break the name into? Oh, I did answer that question. You could break the contact element to break the name field into the first and last name. Is there this specific element? Oh, the contact element. No. Okay. I now understand this question. So you're asking, so someone's asking about this contact element. And I guess what the question comes down to, and I know I'm on this form, but I can kind of illustrate it here. If I had add element and search for contact, you get this element, which is like an address where you're collecting contact information. It has a name, and it's not broken into first and last name. And I'll just show you the element, hit save. And they need it broken down. The answer really is, I can't even go there. The answer really is you're going to have to copy and extend this and make the change. But what I can talk about is there's examples of everything. So if I go into extend, there's a web form example composite module, which shows you how to build your own composite. So you could basically create your own contact element with a first and last name separate. You could also, in that example, just extend the existing contact. So if I do composite, you see there's an example composite. And that's really a code snippet that you can go in there and copy. It shows you kind of there's a nuance for any developer is you need to create a form API element and a web form element so that there's a bridge between Drupal's form API and the web form module. And that's what these examples are kind of getting to. And once you have those two pieces set up, you're pretty much good to go. And I can't get into the code, but it's literally a render array. And when I say render array, by the way, I can go back to this little thing, form API render arrays. I have a slide about this. In the example of a composite element, you're going to see code like this. It's literally, you're just listing out what you want the composite to look like. And this is form API. This is just saying what type element, a text field, a name, and it really can get you going pretty fast. CRM, you referred to CRM several times. That's a customer relational management database. So it's the idea of like Salesforce. They're the experts on managing user data. And web forms are pretty much engaging in your users and collecting data. And that's why I keep talking about CRMs, because in the enterprise, more and more, I would just recommend having a CRM and not using Drupal to store your user data. You know, the user data in Drupal should be about people who are building pages or content. Just a direction. It depends on the scale of your site. Even similar, like with comments, lots of people use third party to manage their comments. So CRM, it's just a matter of someone's filling out a form. Do you really need that data in Drupal? Are you going to do a lot of data with that data in Drupal? If you're not, put it into your CRM. Okay. Oh, so someone's really asking about translations. This is I can answer it best, but boy, I want to just go to my. You don't have to rebuild the form every time. There's videos dedicated to walking through web form translations, and basically, I say I don't have that on. Probably should for the demos. They do is you get a tab on the web form, and you can go and translate just the labels of the elements. You don't have to build a new form. And I mean, I do a lot of translations with web forms. I hope, Ted, that answers it. I can direct you. So when I say there's help videos, if I go here and do a search for translations, this dedicated video about translations. I link to some notes on Drupal.org. I do have a blog post on my blog about the improvements of translations in core. I mean, this is a good opportunity to plug that. I'll go there. Here, we'll scroll down, let my blog load. Oh, it shouldn't be this slow. We've just maxed my machine out. All right. It's funny, I call this a mistake because I've improved the experience. But what's important here is, so previously you could just, this is the UI in Drupal 6. No, in Drupal 8 in 5.x branch, where it's just you're editing the YAML. And we improved it where you're just editing the labels. So this is when you turn on all the translation stuff, you can click on translate this contact form into Spanish and go in and just change the labels of it. I hope this helps. This is a good blog post. It's on my blog, jrockwoods.com. I'm going to go down. There's some questions from 10 minutes ago. Okay. I'm surprised there's 200 people still in the room. I'm going to go to the chat and see what's going on there. Will this session recording after the official session end time? I think this, I don't know if the recording will keep going. Oh, that's a good question. Mike, you just made me laugh. So basically you're eating a sandwich while you're wow, do stakeholder reviews on forums. Okay, so let me see if there's anything I'm missing in here. Bob, you're asking a great question. So how do I pre-populate web form components from a node where the node ID is passed to a web form via URL parameters? You can definitely do that. It's a source entity ID, and I have slides on that. So I'm going to do that. Let me see if I can get there. I like this. This is this concept behind a form. So a source entity tracks and creates a relationship from the Drupal entity from which a web form was submitted. A web form is attached to a node. The node is the entity. Allows web forms to be used multiple times, and it's the current route. So you could, if a web form is attached to a node, it will know it's on a node and look at the current route. It also can be passed through the query string. And this is just showing you in the UI, if you had an event registration system, you'd see this column called submitted to, and those are individual nodes. And I want to answer your question about the URL and just get you to the settings. So let's go here. I have an event registration demo, and I'm going to go to this form and just walk through some of the settings here. So if you go to forms, there's behaviors. And I didn't get into this. There's lots of checkboxes, but at the bottom is all the pre-population. So you could pre-populate values on the form, but there's this checkbox to pre-populate the source entity, and it will walk you through the parameters. So you can go in, and you could direct someone to a form and say, well, the source entity type is node, and the ID is 1. This is also used when you open web forms and modal dialogues. This is heavily used because those modal dialogues are separate pages. There's also these checkboxes for validation and tracking. Very powerful. This is also applied to shared web forms. So you can pass that into a shared web form. I hope that answers that question that Bob asked. Okay. Yeah, everyone's doing their sandwiches. Multiple, okay. Yeah, also, these are great questions. I can't believe how many. Well, you get 400 people on a call. Oh, is there a good way to set up a web form to have some intro questions in a block that, yes, that is really supported. There's like some intro questions. So you put the block up there and you say, hey, start filling out the form. And then after they submit, they go to the next question. I think there's a way to jump it off. I'd have to look. It's a great question. Let me see. If it's not, it should be a feature. One trick, this is a really crazy trick, is there's a really popular video in this question. Okay, so a web form in a block that then goes to a web, like you click submit, and it goes to a different web form. It reminds me of, there's a video. It's really popular because it shows this scenario. So if I go over to help and I do views, that's not it. Oh boy, give me a second. I guess I'm stuck describing it. Okay, here's the scenario. You can create kind of like a starter web form. So you have your massive form. Let's say you have 400 questions on that form. But you want to just show some of the first 2 questions in a block. Create a new web form called Web Form Starter. And it doesn't need to save anything to the database. They start filling out that form and they click submit. And then you redirect them to the master form with the values passed in the URL where you're pre-populating those values. It's a really great pattern. It's also usable for views so that you can create a web form that's like, views have filters. Like you can have massive drop downs, it gets really complex, but maybe you just want a block on your homepage that says search for this piece of information and select this drop down. You can use web forms for that. And basically you disconnect the web form from the back end where it's just a form where someone hits submit and it redirects to the view with the exposed filter pre-populated. It's a really good pattern. If you ask in Drupal Answers, people will actually help you with it. I see people are throwing up stuff in the Q&A, so I'm going to hop back there. Luke, any out-of-the-box integrations, advanced visualizers? No. All of that's being handled by third parties. I think there's a web form analytics module, Zapier. That's kind of why I push people to CRMs, because CRM can crunch the data better than I could in Drupal. Let's see in the chat. Oh, well, that's great. There's a little red thing. Okay, so people are just saying thank you. Wow, yeah, 8 p.m. Oh, I forgot. You're not eating sandwiches. You're eating dinner. Yes, please provide feedback. It helps a lot to get it. This was the first time I tried this massive kind of like smorgasbord session where I'm just giving you more information than we could possibly go through. And I've gone 20 minutes over. Yeah, I like the I'd like to give 3 thumbs up. Wow, say that 3 times in a row. Okay, we're at 187. The numbers are going down. I think people should enjoy their sandwiches and their dinner. Enjoy the rest of DrupalCon. If you really like this session, I know there's 187 people. I think it might be worth checking the Gov Summit session out, especially if you have big projects. Oh, thank you, Ivan, for plugging my funding reads on my blog. I think we're at the end. I'm going to take a sip. That was a lot of fun. I hope the pandemic is over so we can go back to normal. Oh yeah, and I think Gov Summit is free with your registration. So yeah, maybe we do. By the way, I think if you're tweeting about this, tweet that you should go to Gov Summit besides watching this video. Okay. Yeah, we all need to go about. Oh, the link to my blog is jrockwitz.com. HTTPS. There we go. I have to test the link to make sure I gave you the right one. Oh boy, the redirect on. I just saw the redirects broken on Strikingly. By the way, I don't use Drupal, but I think that's very funny. Yeah, Gov Summit. Yeah, Jessica, I love that Gov Summit's at the end of the month. I can't, as the best thing they ever did for presenters is to spread out the summits. it makes it possible for people to kind of balance their time a little better. It made me like, because yeah, I could just look forward to it in at the end of the month, and I haven't even finished the deck yet. But this helps. Even this interaction helps me know what I need to do with that. Okay, I think if I exit the session, you guys will still be in here. But if not, let's go to the next thing.